Hello, everyone. In this unit, we're going to discuss developmental psychology. So, developmental psychology is the scientific study of how humans change over the lifespan, from conception until death. Developmental changes can be grouped largely into three overlapping domains: physical changes, socio emotional changes, and cognitive changes. So, developmental psychology looks at how the body and brain changes and these effects on things from our abilities and how our body functions, like hormone levels or what have you throughout the lifespan. They're also interested in how we think and how our process of thinking changes over our lifespan. And then they're interested in how we interact with others and how we experience and regulate emotions. So when we're looking at the brains of infants, there are two main critical changes that we start to see in the brain of an infant. One, we see that myelinated axons start to form synapses with other neurons. But then these synaptic connections are refined. So as the infant has experiences, those connections are reinforced. Whereas these connections that are made, but then there are no experiences that reinforce those connections, they start to die off. Well, that's not really the right word, but they start to be pruned so that the connections that are most important are strengthened. It's important to recognize though that this is based on experiences. So infants who have more enriched environments can have benefits in brain function. This image here is from a study that I was involved with many years ago, where we looked at environmental enrichment using mice. And so we had mice that lived in these cages that had little houses and things to climb on, and they had toys in it, and they would forage for their food. And we compared this to mice who lived in a barren cage. I mean, had food and water, but nothing else. And we saw benefits in their ability to do learning and memory tasks and in structures of the brain. In humans, we have research has shown that um, children who grow up in poverty or in living conditions of high stress or who have poor nutrition or exposed to toxins can actually have um, differences in their brain development. Now, fortunately, these negative effects can be um, reduced through giving enrichment programs. So it is really important to have programs that can work with young children and can help overcome these possible adverse conditions. Newborn infants have certain reflexes that are hardwired, and these seem to be things that are um, related to aiding in survival. One example, if you kind of rub on the cheek, that you will have this rooting reflex where they'll kind of turn to that, and then sometimes they'll then open their mouth, and then if you put your finger or a pacifier or a bottle tip there in their mouth, they will then start to suck on that. So that is another inborn reflex. And if you place your a finger in like the palm of their hand, they will grasp that. You can see the same thing on like the pad of their foot. Their toes will curl. And so these are things that do not have to be taught. They seem to be just kind of hardwired coming in with the infant. And these do start disappearing over time. One of the things that are often studied in infants is looking at the development of motor skills. So, maturation is the physical development of the brain and body that prepares an infant for voluntary movements. These are things like rolling over or sitting or walking. And so here's an example, kind of looking at the changes that a human baby would show as they progress from being able to raise their head or roll over, all the way to walking. Now, typically, a baby does not need any kind of formal teaching to learn to walk, and they also typically kind of follow a sequence. So here, that they will start to be able to raise their head, and then they'll roll over, and then be able to sit with support, and then on their own, and stand holding on, and being able to pull themselves up on furniture, and walk with support, or be able to stand alone, to be able to walk without assistance. Now, people often kind of become worried about their children because they will see numbers attached to these, about at 4 months they should be able to do this behavior, and it's important to remember that these are averages, and these averages come with a range. And so some children are going to develop these motor skills earlier, and some are going to be later. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything about where the child's going to eventually end up. Even the sequence that they go through still can is not necessarily the same for all children, but yet that doesn't seem to have anything to do with their future ability, say, to walk. One kind of interesting thing is that babies who sleep on their backs will often kind of skip the crawling phase. Now, we've known for several decades now that having a child sleep on its back decreases the likelihood of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. And so, um, this is now the preferred way of having an infant sleep. So the benefits of decreasing the likelihood of SIDS greatly outweigh any change in the typical sequence of walking it, that they might not have the crawling phase, and especially because that doesn't seem to have anything to do with the ultimate ability to walk without assistance. Another area of study is sensory development. Of course, infants are obtaining information around from the world. They're hearing, they're seeing, smelling, tasting, they're touching things. Um, and some of these sensory abilities are more fully developed at birth than others. We typically see that newborns prefer sweet taste. They can usually hear very well, but often have very poor vision. Another area of study has been on early attachment. So all infants have this, fundamental need to form some type of connection with their caregivers. And many years ago, psychologists thought that this was derived from the physical needs of the baby being met. That this was the person who fed the infant, and so therefore that infant would develop attachment to that caregiver, because that's how they were getting these physical needs met. There was this interesting study done by Harlow where he studied infant monkeys, and they created these kind of artificial mothers. They had one mother that was just a wire frame, but had a place for a milk bottle, and then they had this other mother that was made that was wrapped in this soft cloth, but did not provide any type of food. And what they found was that these infant monkeys preferred the mother who provided comfort, who was this comfortable mother, especially if they were in any type of distress. That's the mother they'd want to go to, and they only went to the other mother when they were hungry, just to get their milk, and then but preferred being with the comfortable one. And this was, kind of an initial demonstration that infants tend to form attachments for comfort over just simply meeting a physical need like providing food. Another area of study has been in attachment styles. So we can see across all human cultures that infants or babies can have separation anxiety. Ainsworth created this strange situation test where he looked at the relationship between infants or babies and their mother and their caregivers, and from this derived that there were these different types of attachment styles, such as secure attachment, avoidant attachment, and ambivalent attachment. And there was also a disorganized attachment. So secure attachment was the attachment style for most infants. So when the infant was in the playroom, they would explore the environment and play with the different things as long as the caregiver was present. When the caregiver would get up to leave, then the baby would become distressed, but once the caregiver came back in the room and comforted the child, then that would relieve that distress. Other types of attachment style that showed an insecure attachment. One example of this was the avoidant attachment style. And so this is where the child is not distressed when the caregiver leaves. So they will, they will explore somewhat the unfamiliar environment playing, but when the caregiver got up and left the room, they didn't, it didn't cause distress. And then when the caregiver would return, um, they would avoid the caregiver. They like that didn't um they didn't really care to interact with the caregiver. Ambivalent attachment were babies who were unwilling to explore unfamiliar environments. Um, and they had this kind of ambivalence or this then about their caregiver. So when the caregiver would get up to leave, they may start then like crying or what have you. But then when the caregiver returned and they tried to then comfort the baby, that didn't work. That didn't alleviate the distress that the baby had.